Welcome back, this is Goku7DBC and welcome back for a new best to worst ranking list. This one is going to be special. This is me ranking of consoles I have played. This is ranking from best to worst Sega consoles. Now keep in mind these are the ones I have played. So I am excluding the SG-1000 since it was a Japan release only, and it's rather pricey on top of it. Also, I am excluding the Sega Nomad, because all it is a portable Genesis, so it doesn't count as its own individual console. I, however, am including the Game Gear in with this ranking. So total, we have 7 things to rank. I'm even including the add-ons as its own independent console. So, first up, in 7th place, released in 1994, was the Sega Addon, but it qualifies because it does have its own exclusive library. And that's the unique Sega 32X is in last place. There are a couple of okay games on it. There's like one good Star Wars game that I played back in the day when I had a 32X years ago. I still need to eventually get one, especially before prices get too crazy. There was also a really interesting and cheesy over-the-top fighting game I used to play when I had the 32X before. It was called Cosmic Carnage. A very unique fighting game in its own right. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Rampage, except in space. Still, the 32X was good for what it was. Speaking of, coming in 6th place is another Sega add-on, but I feel its library overall is stronger, overall quality-wise, than the 32X, and that being, of course, the Sega CD. In 6th place, of course, released originally in 1992, it gets up also because it got exclusively the sequel to the 2D fighting game Eternal Champions. It got a sequel to, plus it was the original console release for, in America, of Lunar, Silver Star Story, and Lunar 2, Eternal Blue, which are 2 great JRPG games that I highly recommend check out. With that said, now we go to 5th place, and that is the handheld. I actually do like it better than both the add-ons. I like the exclusive library it had. In 5th place, released originally in 1991, which was far superior technologically than the Game Boy, of course, that being the Sega Game Gear in 5th place. Now, the Sega Game Gear had a couple of really cool exclusive Sonic games I actually liked. Sonic Spinball was one I always kind of enjoyed from the Game Gear, and I like Tails had his own like independent games as well. There was a really good Power Rangers beat 'em up game on the Sega Game Gear. I love Columns for the Game Gear, and one of my all-time personal favorites from the Game Gear was actually Echo the Dolphin. Yes, that was an interesting platformer series, but I'll admit it holds a special place for me because it was one of the first platformer series of games I ever played when I had Sega Game Gear. It was actually the first game I actually ever played on Sega Game Gear was Echo the Dolphin. Second was Columns, which is probably why to this day I have Columns up equally to Tetris for me personally. But with that said, next we have coming in 4th place, the classic oldest Sega console. This was actually the very first Sega console I ever saw. Now, the first Sega console I actually ever owned was a Genesis, but this was the very first Sega console I actually ever got to lay my hands on and play, and that being the Sega Master System, which had some great games, and I highly recommend it. Only in recent years I finally got one, starting to collect some Master System games, but I had played it prior, and I'm glad I did. The Master System is genuinely, in my opinion, a criminally underrated Sega console. I feel deserves a lot more respect than it gets. It had, in my opinion, the best home console port of a classic beat 'em up, Double Dragon, in my opinion, is great on it. Also, I really like the Sega Master System port of Space Harrier, which is a all-time classic arcade game. If you've never played Space Harrier, give it a try. Also, you have other great racing games that was on the Master System, but the Master System really excelled in side-scrolling beat-em-up type games, but especially on-rail shooters is where it really shines. Especially games like Afterburner, which is probably my #1 all-time favorite 8-bit shooter, definitely of all time. Easily, from that area of on-rail shooters, Burn 'em Up will probably always be my personal favorite game from that era. Of course, also the Sega Master System is where the Phantasy Star series would get its start, with the original Phantasy Star, which is a game eventually I need to get around to picking up if I can find it for a reasonable price. But still, nevertheless, Master System deserves a lot more love and respect than it gets. It luckily got a lot of love in England and especially in Brazil, where they still make Master Systems to this day. In Brazil as well as Mega Drive, aka the Genesis. Speaking of, at #3 is the original, the first home console I personally ever owned, which I am proud to say to this day that the Sega Genesis was the very first console I ever owned, which is why it will always be a console that holds a special place for me. That in the fact I got the bundle when I originally got my Genesis, and of course it was bundled with the original Sonic the Hedgehog, which of course will go down in infamy. Definitely, that was my introduction to both Sega and, of course, that being my first video game I ever owned was Sonic the Hedgehog, which is why it's a game that will always hold a special place for me personally, the Sonic series, because it's what got me into platformers in the first place. I know over the years I've come to really respect and enjoy the Mario series, but Sonic is what sparked my love for platformers in the first place. Sonic 1, Sonic 2, and a game I feel like gets overlooked sometimes, Sonic and Knuckles. And as well as great fighting games, like you had the Eternal Champions, which I'm happy that I have that game to this day. Also, other great games like the original Mortal Kombat, I really like playing on the Sega Genesis. Mortal Kombat 2, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, as well as Street Fighter Championship Edition. Even though it's a definite downgrade game-wise, still, I also have the original Fatal Fury on the Genesis, which I love that game, even if it's very inferior to the Neo Geo. I was never lucky enough to have a Neo Geo, because I didn't have that kind of money, needless to say. So yeah, but I will always have very positive memories of the Genesis, which of course was released in '89, hard to believe. And coming at #2 is a game in recent years I have more and more come to really appreciate and admire. In second place, second favorite Sega console of all time, is Sega Saturn, which is a console I really have come to really respect and admire, especially for their library of 2D fighting games. Heck, they still have some really good 3D fighters, maybe janky, but I still really like it. I mean, I still love Virtual Fighter Remix, I still like Battle Arena Toshinden Remix. Of course, Virtual Fighter 2 is an all-time classic 2D game. Virtual Fighter series really deserves a lot more respect than it gets, in my opinion. Battle Arena Toshinden is janky and not great as the game may be today control-wise. It was amazing for the time when it came out, because it was the first weapon-based fighting game out on the market. It was one of also the very first 3D fighting games out there. So you have to keep these things into context. The Saturn, because of the 4 megabyte RAM cartridge, also allowed it to play many great arcade ports at home. I mean, you had great arcade ports like the Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 port. You had Also, great ports of Street Fighter Zero, Street Fighter Zero 2, aka Alpha 1 and 2. You have great ports, specifically Vampire Hunter, Vampire Savior, uh, heck, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, Children or X-Men vs. Children of the Atom, Marvel Superheroes, or Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. I mean, it's Capcom Powerhouse. You have great unique games on it, such as Cyberbots, Full Metal Madness, or what about Fighting Vipers? There's some very unique, interesting, both 3D and 2D fighting games, and you'll have to exclude that sound. And of course, also we got to see the home port, or rather, of course, it was like 1994, then 1995 when it got released in the US for the Saturn, of course. And now coming at number 1, which should be no surprise to anyone because I've already mentioned before, my personal favorite console of all time, besides my favorite Sega console. Number 1 released in America on 9/9/1999 for $199.99. And that being, of course, at number 1, the Sega Dreamcast, which is still one of easily the top 5 most currently underrated game consoles of all time. If you're curious, quickly, what I consider to be the most underrated game consoles of all time, for me personally, in my opinion, I would have to say the Sega Saturn, the Sega Dreamcast, the PlayStation Vita, the Nintendo Wii U. Yeah, I consider all those criminally underrated consoles, and heck, while we're at it, also, the Sega Master System. I mean, frankly, these consoles deserve a lot more love and respect than they get. And that's definitely something I have to say. But in the future, I'll talk about more in depth, maybe on the consoles I consider highly underrated. But with that said, is it any surprise that the Dreamcast is number 1 for me? Shouldn't be. I mean, you have such great fighting games, great many genres of gaming. I mean, it has one of the greatest earlier 3D JRPGs of all time was released on it. Skies of Arcadia. Or how about the awesomeness that is Sonic Adventures, which was great and easily the best 3D Sonic game of all time, in my opinion. Also, you had the greatness that is Crazy Taxi with an amazing soundtrack by one of my favorite punk bands of all time, The Offspring. You have, Street Fighter Alpha 3. My favorite port is the Dreamcast port. You have Street Fighter 3 Double Impact, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. You have Power Stone 1 and 2. You have Soul Calibur 1, which is, in my opinion, the best 3D fighting game of all time. You have Virtual Fighter 3. You have Dead or Alive 2. I mean, there is countless numbers of incredible games on the Dreamcast. It has, for on average, about 2.5-year shelf life in the US overall. It had some of the best video games of all time released on it. Heck, while we're at it, the original Shenmue game. Or, heck, you want to go, what about Star Wars Jedi Power Battles? Or Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, Revenge, or whatever, which was a sequel. You also had many other great games on the console as well. Too many to name. Also, Guilty Pleasure, Mortal Kombat Gold, or Hydro Thunder, and many other great games. Of course, Capcom vs. SNK 1 and Capcom vs. SNK 2, Marvel vs. Capcom 1, Marvel vs. Capcom 2. So the list goes on and on. The amount of amazing games and the amount of love Capcom showed both the Saturn and the Dreamcast is just a few of the many reasons that I love the Dreamcast specifically, but Saturn is in second place. But with that said, that is my rankings of my least favorite to my favorite Sega console of all time. Let me know if in the future you want me to do maybe an updated version of the PlayStation rankings. As well as, I've already been working on a list for in the future. Sometime I will be doing a ranking list, best to worst, favorite to, or rather least favorite to favorite Nintendo consoles of all time. So stay tuned for those future best to worst lists, and I'll see y'all next time. Stay safe out there, and I hope you enjoyed the music in the background from a great Sega Saturn game called Nights into Dreams. But I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel.